Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Curran. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
That's right, and this is a special one.
And today we'll be talking about the Parish and the Hill, a novel from Mary Doyle Curran. So what is the plot of this novel?
This novel's plot is based upon the life of Mary Doyle Curran herself. She was raised in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and as a young girl was born on Thorpe Street. And she lived there. She went to school and church there. She went to church at the Holy Cross Church, which was a mission church of the St. Jerome's Church. And she would go to school at the Highland School in Kennedy Park. Now, she was a person that lived in what probably was a harsh family. Her grandfather died when she was 2 years old, but she talks about him or writes about him in a novel as if she were an older person, like an 8-year-old. And so this is definitely a fiction work, but it's based partly on her life. Now, some of the points to remember is that her mother is very much the center of the family. She likes to have, the mother likes to have a routine based upon the family's life, family meals together, going to church together. Her brothers aren't that great, and Mary Doyle Curran's brothers in the novel sometimes are problem drinkers, and they're not the best workers. So she really loves her mother, and her grandfather is the best in this novel. And it's based upon the parish being St. Jerome's Parish and its mission church, Holy Cross Church. And the hill is where that Holy Cross Church is, and where she's born, she lives, she goes to school and to church. But then you have stories about her going down to St. Jerome's Church and meeting up with her grandfather. And after church down there, she'd go to parks with him, either Veterans Park or Pulaski Park, which was called Prospect Park back then. And it's very beautiful, the first half of the novel. The second half is a lot rougher because it's based upon her brother's deeds, and there are too much drinking and so forth.
And do you suggest this book to others?
Yes, it's a great Mill City novel. The first half of the book is very interesting to read because it shows her life and how it had changed. And it compares the Irish of the first wave of immigration to the Irish that were born in Holyoke and then moved up to the Highlands section of Holyoke. This was a neighborhood that was a lot richer, had a lot of Victorian homes, and they were thought of themselves in a better way. They would buy silverware, true silverware, to show that they were better off. They would have lace curtains, and they would call this a lace curtain society because they were showing off to the Irish that just weren't good enough. And they were talking about the new Polish immigrants into the city in derogatory terms, but for no reason, because they weren't that much better 30 or 40 years before them.
And quickly, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour, and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun, educational, outdoor activities for the whole family, or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they're also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, is this book accurate in the depiction of her life and the depiction of Holyoke?
It's not accurate in the depiction of her life because, for instance, when her grandfather died, she was 8 years old in this novel, But in reality, if you do her family tree, she was 2 years old, and she probably did not remember her grandfather. And yet, that's the most tender and the most obvious part in the beginning of the novel. And then other parts are not true. She would often change the names of certain places. She would also intensify the drinking problems of her brothers in their work habits. And other characterizations probably came up short. But that's not the point. The point is that she wants to dramatize parts of the family's life within Holyoke, how the Irish lived within Holyoke, how their life changed drastically as they moved up the hill and went to a more beautiful church and a more beautiful school, the Highland School, so forth. And that's really, really important here.
And you made a historical tour for this novel. Explain this tour.
Yes, the tour is 10 stops, and 5 stops happen downtown area where you get to go to the church of the grandfather and the business of the grandfather and the father. The grandfather worked at the Parsons Mill 1. The father worked at the Far Alpaca Mill number 1 or 3. And the tour brings you to those places. It also brings you a couple parks, the Pulaski Park and the Veterans Park. And I do this because Holyoke Community College professors, both a history professor and English professor, often have a course based upon this novel, Parish and Hill. And another woman from Holyoke, she passed away in 2023, but in 2022 she asked me to make a historical tour of this. And I was able to add 2 stops to 8 stops I already had for other pieces of tours, and I made a 10 stop tour. She was amazed I could do it so quickly, but it wasn't that difficult. And I hope people take it. I have maps for this tour. Each tour has a text, pictures, video, and most of my podcasts associated with them. So you can really learn a lot on this tour by going through it yourself. If you're a student at the community college, then I hope you take it as part of learning, part as reading the book, and you can impress your professors that you know so much about Holyoke. They might actually assign you to go through pieces of the story.
So thank you, Robert.
Last year, there was a book group, and the book group had to read this book and then discuss it. And about 30 of us met. It was a good discussion. And one of the members of the lead of that book group asked me can you do this as a tour around Holyoke? And I said, sure. The reason why I can do it quickly is that most of the stops on there were already tours that I had given. So I made 10 stops, and 8 of them were already stops that I had already constructed for other tours. So I made 2 more very simple ones, and that got going. I went over it in my bike, and it worked out. So I made a map of it and linked all the stops from previous stops and 2 new ones. And the 2 new ones were a house that she lived in her childhood, and in the business sector along Upper Hampden Street. And then I told the woman, it took me 2 days of time, maybe about 5 hours to do it, and she was amazed. But I told her I constructed it from previous tours. But it works out. I don't know if anyone has taken it. It's not easy to walk, so it's pretty long, but it should work out.
Now, what are the only 2 stops on the tour that are not yet part of other tours that you've done?
All right, so that would be Thorpe Street, and she grew up, and I think she lived there from the age of 2 to the age of 12, and she grew up in that Upper Highlands neighborhood. And Thorpe Street was an apartment, it's still there, it's an apartment complex. And so that's one that they put together. And then the other one was the business district, an upper part of Hampden Street, past the Congregational Church, and includes the present-day Highland store and some restaurants. But when this book was written in the 1940s, some of those businesses were still there, but others weren't. So I point out on that tourist stop exactly what was there. stops that were already ready were like the Highland Grammar School, because that was in Kennedy Park, and that itself is a tour. Then it had things like St. Jerome's Church and Pulaski Park, which was called Prospect Park when this book was made. And it of course, had many other places around Holyoke that were important, the Far Alpaca Mill, the Holyoke Public Library, and so forth. So it was nice to put them all together.
Now, so quickly before we continue with the rest of the interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or want to sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. There he has both videos of the various stops along each tour, also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you are interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Again, that's BOBCAT 4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for group parties, especially those special occasion and get-togethers. They're also good just to get out for the day. Now, getting back to our interview, would you recommend the book?
Yeah, the book, The Parish and the Hill, by Mary Doyle Curran, was finished in 1940. It was the only published book she ever had. She was a professor at Boston University. The first half of the book is easier to recommend. It's a very nice book, and it talks a lot about her meeting with her grandfather in Pulaski Park, and also Veterans Park, of going to church with him, and it was very nice. Her mother was also a very nice person, would try to take care of the extended family, all the cousins and nephews and nieces, so forth that she had. She would try to take great care of it. And so it was pleasant. Now, the second half of the book, when she was upper teenager, she started talking about a lot about her brothers who had alcohol problems and were getting involved in labor disputes around Holyoke. And it became a darker theme to the whole book. And the Parish and the Hill itself, the parish is the lower part of Holyoke around the St. Jerome's Church. The hill is the Highlands neighborhood of Holyoke around the Holy Cross Church. And there was a big difference between the two groups. The parish were a lot of newcomers, or first or second generation of immigrants, whereas the Highlands, or the hill, was where a lot of second and third generations were, and they were starting to get richer and live in beautiful Victorian homes. And so it's quite a difference in thought between the two neighborhoods, and that's where it gets the title from. So you have to be ready to see how Holyoke had changed through the decades. You know, it had gone from a very hard-working generation that her grandfather had, and her father had, into other sorts of problems that she and her cousins and some of her brothers were starting to have. So, yeah, somewhat very good in the beginning and dark towards the end.
And so, does the book give a fair representation of the city?
Well, yes. If you were an Irish immigrant and you're going through 3 generations, so she was 3rd generation, it gives a good representation of that sense. And also you get a good sense of the geography and how the economics were changing the people. And it was a drastic change, of course, because they came here very poor, and by the 3rd generation they were no longer poor at all. But other issues were starting to come up. In other sense, there were more immigrant groups than just the Irish. The other French Canadians outnumbered the Irish, and yet they almost never talk about them. So it's a very distinct book. It's mostly Irish. And I really wonder, would the French Canadians have the same situation going on? They would be different, but probably not as harsh, because the French Canadians stayed away from alcohol and they stayed away from labor disputes. And they also expected less through the years, so the economics didn't change drastically. But they did have some problems going on, of course. And so, yes, it's good representation of that particular ethnic group at that particular century in that particular two neighborhoods. But there was a lot more to Holyoke itself.
Okay, now thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours, and we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. You can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website, again, holyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. And thank you for tuning in.